I'm Russell Mercer, 58 years old, and I live with my wife, Kathleen, in a quiet suburb outside Madison. We've been married for 34 years. 2 grown daughters, 1 grandson, a paid-off house, and enough routines to set a clock by. I manage operations for a regional trucking company. Kathleen works as a pharmacist. We aren't dramatic people. That's why I noticed the package. It arrived on a rainy Thursday. A plain brown box, about the size of a microwave. The delivery man left it by the garage door while I was mowing the lawn. Kathleen practically ran outside. "I'll take that," she said. I laughed. "What did you order?" "A gold bar." She forced a smile. "Just something for work." Then she carried it into the garage instead of the house. That was strange. 3 days later, the box was still there. A week later, still there. Then I started waking up at night and finding my wife sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. Once, I heard her crying softly. I asked if she was sick. She said she was tired. I asked if something happened at work. She said everything was fine. Men who've been married a long time know the difference between fine and fine. I let it go for another week. Then our daughter Olivia called and asked if her mother seemed upset lately. That made my stomach tighten. "Why would you ask that?" I said. "She sounded strange yesterday. Like she'd been crying." After we hung up, I walked into the garage. The box sat exactly where it had been for almost 3 weeks. No shipping label from a pharmacy supplier. No company logo. Just Kathleen's name. I didn't open it. Not then. I simply stood there and looked at it. 34 years of marriage teaches you something important. Secrets are rarely about the thing itself. They're about why someone believes they have to hide it. That evening, Kathleen came home and froze when she saw me standing in the garage. Neither of us said a word. Then she quietly asked, "Did you open it?" "No." She looked relieved. Too relieved. And for the first time in our marriage, I wondered whether I actually knew what was inside that box. I thought I was protecting our peace by waiting. I had no idea that the answer was already changing our lives. That night we ate dinner in almost complete silence. The television was on, but neither of us watched it. Kathleen kept glancing toward the back door that led to the garage. Finally, I put my fork down. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" She looked up. "No." "Financial trouble?" "No." "Medical?" Her hand froze around her glass. It was only a second, but after 34 years of marriage, a second is enough. I leaned back in my chair. "Kathy, what is going on?" She stood and carried her plate to the sink. "I'm just tired." I almost pushed harder. Almost. But forcing answers out of someone rarely gets you the truth. It gets you panic. The next morning, she left early for work. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a text from our younger daughter, Claire. "Dad, has Mom said anything strange to you lately?" My chest tightened. I called her immediately. "Why is everyone asking me that?" I said. Claire hesitated. "I stopped by last week. Mom asked where I keep my medical records." "Your medical records?" "Yeah." Then she started asking about our family history. Cancer, heart disease, stuff like that. I stared out the kitchen window. Did she say why? No. She changed the subject. After we hung up, I went straight to the garage. The box was still there. This time I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. I noticed something else. The tape had already been cut once and then resealed. So Kathleen had opened it. And whatever she saw had made her cry at night. I set the box back down. Then I saw an envelope sticking out from underneath it. It had fallen behind a shelf. I bent over and pulled it free. My wife's name was written across the front. In the upper left corner was the logo of a medical clinic in Chicago. I just stood there holding that envelope. A medical clinic. Suddenly every late-night tear, every distracted look, every forced smile came rushing back. Men, what would you have done? I heard the garage door begin to open. Kathleen's car was pulling in. She wasn't supposed to be home for another 3 hours. And I was standing there with that envelope in my hand. I thought I had finally found the answer. I was wrong. The real question was why my wife had hidden it from everyone she loved. Kathleen stepped out of the car and stopped cold when she saw me. Then she saw the envelope. For a long moment neither of us moved. I forgot my lunch, she said quietly. I held up the envelope. A clinic in Chicago? The color drained from her face. Russell. No games. No half answers. She closed the garage door and leaned against it as if her legs had suddenly become weak. I wasn't angry. I was scared. We've been married 34 years, I said. If something is wrong, you don't carry it alone. Tears filled her eyes. It's not what you think. I've learned that sentence usually means a person is terrified, not dishonest. I placed the envelope on the workbench. Then tell me what it is. Instead, she looked at the box. That box had become the third person in our marriage. She walked over to it and rested her hand on top. I couldn't figure out how to tell you. Tell me what? She didn't answer. I finally picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was an appointment summary and several pages of information. At the top was a name I didn't recognize. Not Kathleen's. Not anyone in our family. I looked up. Who is this? She covered her mouth and began to cry. The kind of crying that comes from someplace old and deep. I didn't want this, she whispered. I felt a chill run through me. Kathleen, who is this person? She sank onto a stool beside my tool cabinet. You remember my brother, Daniel? Of course. He called me 6 weeks ago. Her brother lived in Arizona. We saw him maybe once every 2 years. He said a woman had contacted him through a genealogy website. I frowned. A woman looking for her biological family. I said nothing. Kathleen looked up at me with red eyes. She believes I'm her mother. The garage suddenly felt too small. We had 2 daughters. Only 2. At least that's what I had believed for 34 years. I looked at the strange name on the paper again. Then at the box. Then back at my wife. What are you saying? She took a shaky breath. The package contains the DNA test. I couldn't speak. The rain started outside, tapping softly on the garage roof. And for the first time since I noticed that brown box, I realized this story might not be about illness or money at all. It might be about a secret buried so long that even my wife had been afraid to touch it. I thought I was finally seeing the whole picture. Then Kathleen said 7 words that changed everything. I never told anyone about the baby. I sat down on the old wooden chair beside my workbench because my knees suddenly didn't trust me. The baby? I repeated. Kathleen nodded. When I was 19. I stared at her. We met when she was 22. Married at 24. In all our years together, she had never mentioned another child. She wiped her eyes. I was in college. I got pregnant by a boy I had been dating for less than a year. I didn't interrupt. He left when I told him. My parents were ashamed. My father arranged a private adoption through a family friend. The rain outside grew heavier. I held that little girl for maybe 10 minutes. Her voice broke. And then she was gone. I looked at my wife and saw something I had never seen before. Grief that had been waiting 40 years to be spoken. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly. She looked down at her hands. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd think less of me." I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because it was so painfully human. 34 years together, and she still feared I might judge the 19-year-old version of her. "I loved you when we had no money," I said. "I loved you when we lost my father. I loved you through every hard year we've had. Why would this change that?" She cried even harder. "The woman contacted my brother because she couldn't find me. She has children of her own now. She only wants answers." I looked at the box. "The DNA test confirms it." Kathleen nodded. I finally opened it. Inside was a framed photograph. A woman in her late 30s stood beside two teenage boys. Tucked behind the frame was a note. "I don't want to disrupt your life. I just wanted to know where I came from and whether my mother ever thought about me." I had to look away. Because I suddenly understood why my wife had been sitting awake at night. This wasn't a secret affair. This wasn't betrayal. This was 40 years of buried sorrow arriving on our doorstep in a cardboard box. Then Kathleen whispered something that made my heart ache. I don't know if I deserved to answer her. I thought I understood what needed to happen next. I didn't. Because the next thing I said would decide whether my wife carried this burden alone for the rest of her life. I picked up the photograph again. The woman had Kathleen's eyes. There was no denying it. I sat beside my wife and took her hand. "Kathy, listen to me." She couldn't even look up. "I need you to answer one question. Did you stop loving that child because you signed adoption papers?" She shook her head immediately. "No. Never." "Then you've already answered the only question that matters." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I thought if I told you, you'd see me differently." I smiled sadly. "We all have chapters that existed before we met. Marriage doesn't erase them. It gives us someone to help carry them." For the first time that day, she looked directly at me. I squeezed her hand. "You were 19. Scared. Alone. And from the sound of it, nobody gave you much choice." She began crying again, but this time there was relief in it. "What do I do?" she whispered. I looked at the photograph. "You tell her the truth. The whole truth. The whole truth." We sat there for a long time. Then I carried the box into the house and put it on the kitchen table. The same table where we had paid bills, celebrated birthdays, and made difficult decisions for more than 3 decades. It seemed fitting. That evening we called our daughters. There were tears. A lot of them. But there was no anger. Claire actually laughed through her tears. "So I have an older sister." Olivia said, "Mom, why on earth would we judge you for this?" Kathleen broke down again. The next morning she wrote a letter. Not an email. A letter. She told the woman everything. About being 19. About never forgetting her. About wondering every year if she was happy. At the end she wrote one sentence. "I have thought about you for 40 years. 3 weeks later, a reply came. Then a phone call. 2 months after that, we drove to Chicago. I watched my wife meet her firstborn daughter in the lobby of a small hotel. Neither of them said a word at first. They simply hugged and cried. I'm not ashamed to admit I had to wipe my own eyes. A few hours later I was introduced to 2 teenage boys who suddenly called me Grandpa. Life is funny that way. You think a mysterious box in the garage is the beginning of a disaster. Sometimes it's the beginning of healing. Kathleen still apologizes for keeping the secret. I always tell her the same thing. The mistake wasn't that she had a child before we met. The mistake was believing she had to carry that pain alone. Marriage isn't about having no secrets in your past. It's about having enough trust to bring those secrets into the light. And after 34 years together, my wife and I learned something new. Families don't always grow the way we expect. Sometimes they arrive in a cardboard box. What if the secret threatening your marriage wasn't betrayal at all, but an old wound your spouse was too afraid to share? Sometimes the strongest husbands don't save a marriage by winning an argument. They save it by making room for the truth.